Most people who visit Japan for the first time tend to walk away with a strong impression. That impression rarely comes from grand landmarks alone, but from small, easily overlooked details. Streets that are remarkably clean, public spaces that feel orderly and calm, and transportation systems that operate almost to the exact minute. Even something as ordinary as stepping into an airport, a train station, or a convenience store conveys a sense of quiet stability. Many visitors notice that expectations around cleanliness and maintenance are unusually strict. Whether a floor reflects light properly, equipment is returned to its place, or a space maintains visual consistency, these are treated not as extra effort, but as basic responsibility. Taken together, these details create an atmosphere that is difficult to ignore, and they often lead travelers to the same question. Why does Japanese society place such strong emphasis on order, precision, and doing things properly? Where does this seemingly instinctive sense of rigor come from? When confronted with such a high level of behavioral consistency, many people instinctively attribute it to national character, assuming that Japanese people are simply born more meticulous, disciplined, or morally driven. However, this explanation is overly simplistic and overlooks how social behavior actually takes shape. When we step back and examine the issue through the lens of history and institutions, it becomes clear that no society begins with such uniform standards of conduct. The way people work and behave is rarely a matter of instinct. Rather, it is the result of long-term adjustment, selection, and reinforcement within a particular environment. When a society imposes costs on carelessness, but consistently rewards diligence, people naturally learn to adapt their behavior. To understand why Japanese society developed such a strong emphasis on detail and quality, it is essential to look at the role of institutions. Before entering the modern era, Japan spent long periods in a state of decentralization and frequent conflict. Especially during the age of civil war, local lords depended heavily on people with specialized skills in order to survive and compete. Whether they were craftsmen who forged weapons, artisans who produced tools, or specialists who mastered particular production techniques, these individuals did not contribute mere physical labor. What they possessed was expertise that could not be easily replaced. As a result, they were gradually separated from the general farming and laboring population, forming a distinct class centered on skill, responsibility, and technical mastery. Within this social structure, the idea of one profession for a lifetime became the norm. For these specialists, technique was not simply a way to earn a living, it defined identity and social value. Expectations placed upon them were clear and uncompromising. Quality had to be consistent, results had to be reliable, and mistakes were not easily tolerated. To ensure that skills continued to improve and could be effectively passed down, systems were established that relied on strict evaluation and elimination. Work that failed to meet standards was rejected outright and often treated as a serious failure of responsibility. These high demands were not rooted in moral preaching, but in practical necessity, rules shaped by the realities of survival and competition. At the same time, this class of skilled specialists was not subjected to pressure in only one direction. In return for their obligations, they were typically granted relatively stable living conditions, higher social status, and a working environment protected from constant labor demands and external interference. This institutional arrangement sent a clear signal to society. Those who could do a single task well and maintain that level of quality over time would earn respect and security. Gradually, diligence ceased to be merely a personal choice. It became a way of survival repeatedly reinforced by the system itself, and eventually internalized as a standard pattern of behavior. Beyond institutional design, Japan's natural environment has also quietly reinforced a heightened sensitivity to detail and precision. Surrounded by the sea, limited in land area, and possessing relatively little arable land, the Japanese archipelago also sits along the Pacific Ring of Fire. Earthquakes, volcanic activity, typhoons, and heavy rainfall have been recurring features of life throughout history. In such an environment, daily life carries a high degree of uncertainty, where a single oversight can result not in minor inconvenience, but in genuine threats to life and survival. Over time, this experience has fostered an extremely low tolerance for error across society. As the cost of mistakes becomes increasingly severe, people naturally gravitate toward advanced preparation, repeated verification, and reliance on clear, stable procedures to reduce risk. This sensitivity to risk extends far beyond disaster prevention or engineering. It gradually permeates everyday life, shaping approaches to time management, work organization, public order, and cooperative division of labor. Punctuality in this context is not merely a matter of courtesy, but a form of responsibility toward others and the system as a whole. Likewise, doing things thoroughly is not simply about striving for perfection, but about preventing cascading consequences. In a high-risk environment, carelessness becomes a luxury. Compared with societies that can tolerate repeated trial and error, Japan has tended to minimize risk in advance. This helps explain why procedures, standards, and regulations are treated with such seriousness. Over time, this pursuit of stability reinforced the institutional role of skilled professionals, making careful, reliable, and error-free behavior not only widely accepted, but actively expected within society. Through the long-term interaction between institutions and environment, a value system centered on responsibility gradually took shape in Japanese society. This value is often condensed into the phrase issho kenmei, commonly translated as giving one's utmost effort. Originally, however, it was not an abstract moral slogan, but a very concrete condition of survival. In the feudal era, once a warrior was granted land, his life became inseparably tied to the success of that territory. Whether order, productivity, and security could be maintained directly affected the survival of his family. As a result, doing one's utmost was not merely a matter of honor, but a responsibility bound to life and death. As the warrior class dissolved, this way of thinking, of committing one's life fully to a given role, did not disappear. Instead, it was transferred to other social roles. Artisans, merchants, and later company employees gradually came to define their self-worth through the portion of responsibility they carried. Work was no longer simply a means of earning income, but a commitment to be accountable for outcomes. How thoroughly a task was completed became a measure of one's responsibility to both oneself and the group. This sense of responsibility has, on one hand, enabled a highly reliable social system. On the other, it has also created invisible psychological pressure. When doing one's best becomes the default expectation, mistakes are no longer seen as purely technical issues, but are often internalized as personal failure. Over time, seriousness and commitment cease to be optional choices and instead become inescapable demands. Understanding this dynamic helps clarify the psychological structure behind Japan's social rigor. It is both a source of cohesion and a system that places heavy demands on the individual. Even in modern society, the imprint of this value system remains clearly visible in Japan. Whether in manufacturing, service industries, or everyday workplaces, there is a widespread emphasis on process, clear division of responsibility, and the quality of outcomes rather than on speed or sheer volume. When a task is completed, what often matters most is whether it meets established standards, whether it serves the end user properly, and whether it can be sustained over time, more than how quickly it was done. This way of thinking is also reflected in work attitudes, as many people see their role as one part of a larger system, aware that a single breakdown can affect others downstream. For this reason, punctuality, adherence to procedures, and repeated checks of details are not meant to showcase personal diligence, but to avoid causing inconvenience to others. This system-oriented mindset naturally regulates individual behavior and turns doing things properly into a baseline expectation rather than a special achievement. From an outsider's perspective, such a culture may appear rigid or lacking in flexibility, but within Japanese society, it functions as a mechanism for maintaining stability and mutual trust. As a result, Japan's sense of rigor is not confined to specific professions or elite groups. It permeates everyday life, operating as a quiet social consensus, one that is widely observed, yet rarely stated outright. However, no social system that endures over time is composed only of strengths without costs. When rigor, responsibility, and high standards become universal expectations, the pressure placed on individuals inevitably increases. In Japanese society, many people are taught from an early age to avoid causing trouble for others and to take full responsibility for their assigned roles. Over time, these external expectations are easily internalized as intense self-discipline. Mistakes are not seen merely as technical errors. They are often interpreted as a lack of seriousness or even as a failure of responsibility toward the group. Within such an atmosphere, excessive self-blame, long working hours, and difficulty refusing others' expectations become common experiences. The other side of strong collective responsibility is that personal boundaries can become blurred, and rest or relaxation may feel as though they require justification. This does not mean that the value system itself is inherently flawed, but it does remind us that when any cultural model is pushed to its limits, the psychological burden it creates also deserves attention. To understand Japanese rigor is not only to understand how it functions, but also to recognize the costs required to sustain it. Looking back, the meticulousness and discipline seen in Japanese society are not the result of a single cause, but of a long-term interaction between institutions, environment, and values. The artisan-based system made doing things well a behavior that could be rewarded. A high-risk natural environment heightened social sensitivity to error. Responsibility-centered values then internalize these patterns as personal obligations. Together, these forces reinforced one another, shaping a society that is stable and reliable, yet also highly self-regulating. For this reason, Japanese rigor is less a form of perfectionism than a survival strategy developed to reduce risk and maintain trust. It allows society to function smoothly while simultaneously placing heavy, often invisible responsibilities on individuals. Recognizing this helps us move beyond simple praise or criticism and instead view culture more clearly as something gradually shaped, step by step, by historical conditions.